Chapter 28. It was weird when Tommy woke up. Wilbur obviously hadn't been allowed to cook breakfast today, since there was no smell coming from the kitchen. Tommy had developed a routine of leaving his door ajar, so Phil yelling for him to wake up could be heard. That was weird too. He didn't know what time it was, but he felt exhausted. Meaning it was past midday, and Phil hadn't shouted at him yet. But by that point, even Techno was awake, and the fucker would burst into his room and rip Henry out of his arms just to throw it in his face. He shouldn't still be in bed, with blankets and a sheeted mattress that was colder than usual. Too cold to blame it on the small breeze slipping through the suicide prevention windows. Fingers threaded through his hair, brushing against his scalp just how Wilbur usually did. He leaned into the touch. His eyes fluttered, but remained shut. A content hum rumbled his chest as Wilbur's palm cascaded down his forehead. It brought him comfort, something he needed to ease the unfamiliarity of this morning. The bed dipped, and arms wrapped around his shoulders, holding him close to Wilbur's chest. Yet, the hands were more calloused than Wilbur's. Big enough to remind him of his older brother, but still different. Less solid and weighted, almost transparent. Wilbur? He stammered, his speech slurred and rough. The air tasted bitter, thickening his tongue and drying his throat. It wasn't Techno or Phil either. Their hands were always warm. He moved away from the hand to settle deeper into his bed, but there was no bed. There was no bedroom to begin with, no connection to the kitchen, or to Techno's room just one door down. He opened his eyes, and a blackened state greeted him. Oh. He was dead. No, it couldn't be. He was just in his bedroom. Wilbur was there, holding him as he woke up from the night before, and the tears fell too fast for him to realize his face was already wet. He wished for nothing but to be back with those he loved. He didn't care if it meant he would have to repeatedly die in their arms, forced to hear the pleads from Wilbur, Techno's frustration, and the sobs from Phil. He didn't care. He wanted them back. He wanted to be held. The void offered him no comfort. No reassuring whispers, no warmth. Not like Wilbur's touch could. He should be used to this. The loneliness in the void as time caught up and rebirth decided his next fate. But no part of him ever adjusted to the cruel abyss. The sinking loneliness and isolation. He had grown accustomed to the casual pats on the shoulder, ruffles of his hair, and tight hugs. The solitary on his skin hurt. It stung to be alone now. Tommy hated himself for letting himself believe that it would be permanent, that the love which brought yellow roses to his chest and completeness to his heart would stay. He should have known that nothing stayed, including himself. If he screwed his eyes shut tight enough, then he'd be back in the kitchen and scooped into someone's arms, given all the special treatment he normally despised. But after today, he'd accept anything. He would wake up in his room, gaze at the wall of photos, and tuck Henry back under the covers, ready for the day. There would be noise from the kitchen, clashing of frying pans as Wilbur attempted to flip pancakes, huffing from Techno's coffee machine, and Phil reprehending Wilbur for dropping another pancake on the floor. Home. It would be home. But instead of the cluttered dining table, blinding smiles and heaves of laughter, Tommy was alone, in a state of desolation. He knew he didn't deserve this. He had more time, yet death still took him from the only life he never wanted to leave. from the one family that ever loved him. A light, yet burdening weight hauled downwards on his cold palm. Golden yarn, coated in dried blood, laid in his hands. Ariadne's thread. His myth's expression of love and loyalty. A display that twisted into one of misery and abandonment. Was that his fate? To be loved and neglected the second his use didn't matter? It couldn't be true. It shouldn't. At least it all made sense. The reason why his past foster families were pieces of shit. Why his void changed with labyrinth maze walls, ships, and islands. Betrayal and abandonment riddled this life. All because one Cretan princess wanted to be loved. He tugged harshly on the thread, and his throat screamed out in protest. He doubled over, clutching his neck, coughing out as something choked him. Tommy clawed at his skin, at the rope, the thread wrapped around his neck like a noose. The reminder that he was a loveless being, cursed to never be fulfilled in any life, strangled him. Bruises taunted his throat. This was his new scar, the mark of Ariadne, who killed herself on that island after her promised lover left her to die. His neck felt lonely without the green bandana and locket there to keep him warm. It was wrong for Ronbu and Tubbo to not be constantly by his side, attached to him, no matter where they physically were. He was stupid to think it would transfer across lives. Tommy wanted his best friends back. He wanted his family. He wanted to finally finish his GCSE exams, to relish in the congratulations from Nikki, to thank Clementine for his English result, to make Phil pin his grades to the fridge. Amongst it all, he wanted to live. But it was futile. All of it was. In the distance, a masked smile reappeared. The festering anger, the unfairness of his death, the frustration, the bloodied lips and dying in the arms of his family, it all returned. His ears rang. "Bring me back, Zagreus!" he spat. Dream came closer with a frown. "Bring me back!" Dream winced and shook his head slowly. "I'm sorry, Tommy." His grip on the thread tightened, his muscles daring him to tug. "What more do I have to do to show you I don't want to do this anymore?" he asked, his voice rising. "I just want it to be over." Dream remained quiet. The godly glow around him dulled. His amulet had more scratches tainting it. "What lesson do I need to learn to finally fucking die?" he yelled, hating the other's silence. He wanted the old Dream back, the one who didn't hesitate to pick a fight with him, the man who shouted louder and hit back harder. He needed that, a return to normal, to how it used to be, how it should be. "I wanted you to finally be free," Dream muttered at last, pain hindering his tone. He had never heard Dream sound so defeated before. The fight in him had died. No aspect screamed of godhood or superiority. He didn't like it. "I broke so many rules. I gave you all the clues I could possibly give. For nothing." Dream continued, with wisps of guilt. He curled his hand, holding Ariadne's thread, into a fist, and yanked. He didn't care that it strangled him, that the constraint burned his throat and pierced his neck. He welcomed the pain, the lack of air, the essence of death. It was a part of him now. "Tommy, stop!" Dream protested, fear in his voice. "Let me die," he whispered, embracing the pain in his throat. His eyes watered, yet no more tears fell. He could almost imagine being trapped in a room with a single button, wooden signs of a once freeing tune of an upcoming nation plastered on the stone walls. An older man, far wiser than the other, towering over him with a sword forced into his hands. "Kill me, Dream. I can't." Tommy tied the thread around Dream's fingers, bounding the noose in his grasp. He held on to Dream with pleading in his eyes and screaming in his head. He wanted this to be over. He missed them. Wilbur's healing smile, the rough chuckles Techno gave out whenever Tommy said something funny, the exasperated sighs from Phil despite the grin on his face, Tubbo and Ronbu's company on that bench in school, Nikki's calming residence. He missed it all. There was no point in living another life if they weren't there. "Do it, Dream!" he shouted, his face red. "Kill me! I can't!" Dream argued, hoarse and shaky. "You're like me, Tommy. You understand it all, and I can't kill you." "I'm not like you," he hissed, glaring with bleary and tired eyes. "I'm nothing." He tugged on Dream's hand, forcing the thread to tighten around his neck. He choked and fell into Dream's chest, his chest inflamed. He needed that sword, the same blade that took his brother's final breath. A stab in the chest, a mercy kill, the deed of a defeated man. That was what he yearned for. Tommy, with blurred vision, gazed at the man who made him Ariadne, who dictated his dark experiences in the foster system from Minos to make sense, and let him fall in love just to pull it all away from him a day before his death. If Dream cared, this would be all over. Tommy would be dead, permanently this time. Dream untangled the thread from his hands. "It wasn't supposed to end like this," he mumbled. "For both of our sakes, Tommy, you were supposed to live." A tear rolled down Dream's exposed cheek, painting his face with deep crevices of remorse. Tommy gritted his teeth, anger decimating his bloodstream. Dream didn't have the right to feel guilt. The crying god was the same person who fed on Tommy's pain as he failed another life. This dream projected Dio's face all over the blackened void and laughed when Tommy grieved his Eurydice's death, his other half, from his Orpheus life. This dream mocked the Church of Prime as prayers of mercy fled from Tommy's lips, scorch marks still littered on his Icarus hands. Every piece of him had been wronged and abused by the masked deity. And here he was, crying. Tommy shoved at Dream's chest. He pushed and pushed as his face refused to dry. Dream took each shove, his feet stable on the ground as Tommy stumbled. He wanted Dream to hurt, to fall, to collapse just as he had for years. He needed the other to feel the pain that had been following him for centuries, ever since war stole his childhood and the gods took away his right to die. No amount of sorrow or tears falling down Dream's face could distract Tommy from the fact that this was the man who caused it all to happen. "You fucking coward," he snarled, jaws clenched. "Just kill me!" He begged and begged, to no avail. An emotionless mask stared back with no intent of violence hidden in the painted smile. Tommy ripped the mask off his face and gripped the object that haunted his waking presence and corners of consciousness. Green eyes, wrecked enough to seem human, and diluted in agony, laid exposed, looking down at him as if nothing else mattered. Tommy threw the mask to the ground and stomped until a shattered visage littered the floor. He savored the cracking sound as the god, as the man, winced. There was no omnipotent gleam surrounding Dream, No shine in his amulet, nor green in his cloak. Everything that made Dream Zagreus had faded. Sisyphus appeared to have changed both of them. Dream had said so before, that watching Tommy cradle the dead body of his mother, who overdosed because of his own money, destroyed the entertainment of rebirth. But he still didn't get why. Why was he cursed in the first place? What the fuck did he do to deserve cyclical torture and torment, restarting life for it only to end 16 years later? He didn't know. He didn't want to know. There wasn't an ounce of him that simply cared anymore. Sobs broke from his trembling lips. His blood boiled and head pounded, but for nothing. With a final punch to Dream's stomach, he fell to the ground. There was no point in getting up. He touched the permanent bruising and thread wrapped around his neck and cried. A withered apology from Dream echoed the endless walls of the void, and Tommy was alone again. He embraced the second layer of his skin, the familiar wound of abandonment. His palm lay flat on the floor, fists no longer curled with anger. He was so tired of this, of having to fight back, to stand strong and take every wrongdoing forced upon his body and failed lives. He didn't want to be strong, to have to endure everything with a grain of salt and rely on no one but himself. He wanted someone to be there for him, to protect and shelter him from the cold. But that someone, that family, was gone. A hand brushed along his shoulder. It was the same hand that combed through his hair, mimicking the comforting touch and grounding presence of Wilbur. He looked up and froze. White, hollow eyes, steaming with blue-stained tears, stared at him. The figure had an opaque yellow jumper, blue dye and blood blemishing the fabric, and a maroon beanie covering his crumpled brown hair. The hole in his chest and transparency surrounding the spirit wasn't what scared Tommy. It was that the figure wore his brother's face, W. Soot's face. "Who are you?" Tommy asked. His voice wavered. "You know who I am," he replied. The words, ominous and threatening, yet his tone conveyed a soft melody, one oblivious to the hatred in the world and the black of the void. The same softly pointed nose, thick dusted eyebrows, and toothful smile. This was the man inside of Wilbur's soul. But not. The darkness in his eyes was replaced by a vacant tint. There was a detached essence to his face, an innocence Tommy hadn't seen in centuries. The ghost of his brother, an empty shell of an ill man who died in that buttoned room mined into the side of a hill. "Will," Tommy whispered, tears pricking at his eyes at just the face of his dead brother. At this moment, he was glad the Wilbur of this life didn't share W. Soot's appearance. It took everything in him to not crumble into the arms of his dead brother, to give in to the part of him that wished to be a little kid again, and hide behind the one who raised him. His feet didn't move. The ghost giggled, a carefree tune that drew Tommy in closer. His feet stumbled. "You've gotten taller," he exclaimed, bubbly and free. And... He laughed again, but it carried more weight this time. A piece of reality eased into him. "I missed you." Tommy blinked, stumped. The ghost's toothless grin changed into a childlike pout. He sniffed, trying to contain himself. This version of his brother saddened him more. It was as if his brother had been shattered into pieces and glued back together, only for the most important bits, the parts that made him whole and his, to be missing. Where was the light-hearted glint to his narrowed gaze? The mischief equipped in his top lip? The cigarette smoke and intimidating stance? Though there was still a bleakness confining the ghost. The burden of his brother's memories was present, locked away, but still aware of its location. His brother sowed the seeds of war and punishment, and the figure, once drenched in the Leith waters and chained in Tartarus's grip, paid the price. I missed you too, Tommy confessed, failing to keep the anguish out of his voice. His throat hurt more than it did before, when Ariadne's thread constrained his neck. The ghost's smile brightened. His tongue peeked between his teeth. Happiness radiated off of him. His dead brother hovered closer. His hand caressed Tommy's cheek. He pinched it teasingly, just like he used to. Another tear rolled down Tommy's face, wetting the ghost's hand. He never wanted the touch to leave. He didn't want his brother to leave again. Yet the touch disappeared as quickly as it began. I have something for you, the ghost gasped, the forgetful haze leaving his hollow eyes for just a moment. Tommy wiped his face, rubbing where his brother's hand was. A familiar book materialized in the ghost's hands. His notebook. He reached forward and took it, the thread tangled around his fingers, stinging as it skimmed against the leather. Tommy bit the inside of his cheek, conflicted. With this book in his hands, it confirmed everything. That his last life, his Ariadne myth, was over, and the cycle would repeat soon. But the excitement practically propelling off of his brother's ghost confused him. Why would he be happy about this? Why was he happy about any of this? The misguided euphoria pained him more than it should have, only hardening the reminder that this was a lost spirit, forced into forgetfulness and tortured for years on end in the depths of the underworld, left astray in more ways than just one. Open it, the ghost said, gesturing to the page with the old bookmark. Hesitant, Tommy did so. Something fell from the bookmarked page. He grabbed it, and his face paled. It was his favorite Polaroid picture they took from that day trip to London. The one where Ronbu's uncovered face was too elated to not treasure, and Tubbo's cheerful smile was more infectious than usual. His fingers traced the image, circling the heads of his best friends. People he would never see again. He would never hear their laughter or teasing sighs whenever he made a dumb or immature joke. Tommy dreaded the day he would forget what their voices sounded like. He rubbed his eyes before they watered again and tucked the image back into the opened page. It was something he needed to get over before rebirth took it all away. At least he wouldn't forget their faces. The ghostly hand returned to his shoulder as he peered down at the chosen page. It wasn't blank. There was writing on it that didn't belong to him. He didn't write this. Smudges followed every written S. Each A was always connected to the preceding letter. It was Phil's handwriting. His bottom lip trembled again as he read the rushed writing. His heart clenched at every full stop and damp teardrop on the page. The papers to adopt you were almost finished. You weren't supposed to go. We wanted you to stay. I hope you know that. I won't be able to look at the color red the same without picturing that fucking shirt you never stopped wearing no matter Wilbur's protests at your shit fashion sense. Pancakes. The blue in everything. Old medieval music. The third seat on the sofa. Even cows now. I didn't think a cow plushie would have such an impact. But that's what you did best. Impacted us. You won't be replaced. You won't be forgotten. I'll make sure of it. Even though you were never officially my son, you always were to me. And always will be. I love you. Arms held him as he sobbed into his dead brother's shoulder. His chest heaved, aching at every broken attempt to breathe. He loved them. He loved them so fucking much, and they would never hear him say it back. Are they happy tears? The ghost asked, worried. His transparent hands rubbed circles into Tommy's back. My tears burn, but not yours. Yours shouldn't. They need to be happy to not burn. Tommy sobbed harder, desperately gripping at his brother, waiting for the cold in his heart to disappear. But the ghost emitted no warmth. His brother made a noise of distress as Tommy left his question unanswered. The happy tears will, Tommy whispered, his voice breaking. Look. He attempted to smile. I'm happy. The ghost nodded, his demeanor lightening. Good. That's good. Do you remember what you did? The ghost hummed, confused. To L'Manberg. He continued, and paused. And to me. His brother stilled. I didn't hurt anyone, yet I'm the one who pays for it. Was all the ghost said, with no more light to his eyes, no smile on his lips. The carefree tune descended into a minor key, filled with interrupted cadences full of blank memories and a slow pace, accommodating the overwhelming sense that this was his fault, that this was deserved despite the misplaced suffering. Tommy regretted asking. I want to go home. He whispered into his dead brother's neck, his eyes clenched shut. L'Manberg isn't far from here. The ghost whispered back as he stroked Tommy's hair gently. But she doesn't like me going there. He paused, frowning. Who? His brother stilled again, sharper this time. The ghost sighed and released his grip on Tommy. I need to go, he said, urgency and haste corrupting his soothing tone. I need to... She wouldn't want me here. Who will? The ghost shook his head and moved away. No, wait, please don't go! Please don't go! Tommy cried out, grasping for his brother's hands, only for his skin to pass straight through. Don't leave me again. Despite his bleeding pleas and flowing tears, with one final touch to his cheek, his brother bared a radiant grin and departed, taking all the light and yellow in the void with him. Tommy shrunk deeper into himself and let his head slam against the floor. He couldn't do this anymore. He can't... It was too much. His skin stung again, more painful than before. He didn't even get to say goodbye. The croaking of ravens disturbed his misery. Wings flapping circled his head, and steps echoed closer. He scrambled up from the floor, his back scraping as he shuffled away from the noises. His arms shook by his side as a figure darkened the void. It was the same tall figure from the palace. As it crept forward, more features became known. A dark purple gown, adorned with withered flowers, and a veil covered her face. Black wings fluttered over her shoulders, and a raven sat on one hand, a scythe gripped tightly in the other. She stopped meters away from Tommy, though her eyes didn't focus on him. "Zagreus, come out of hiding." Her voice was as elegant as she looked, dipped in authority and strength, yet there was an ounce of kindness, of heart. "Lady Death, please." Dream emerged from the shadows, his face paler than before, and eyes dulled to a gray. He stood in between the woman and Tommy. His legs quivered, yet his arms stayed steady, spread out in front of him. It was almost as if he was protecting Tommy, creating a barrier between him and upcoming death. Dream looked back at him, lips thinned and face furrowed. He was scared. "You know better than to speak," she said, with no need to raise her voice or change her tone. Tommy flinched, as her wings sprouted further. "Don't touch him," Dream ordered, his jaw clenched. "You know our deal, Zagreus," she said, her head tilted, but not mockingly. She walked closer, the veil slowly revealing her face. Her hair matched the feathers of the raven perched on her hand. It was almost familiar. "Return to your cell until I decide what to do with you." Screaming rattled the void as shadows encaged Dream whole. A whimper left Tommy's lips. He was alone with her. The woman sighed and lifted her veil. She had a tanned face, almost black eyes, complemented with winged eyeliner and red lipstick. Her cheekbones sharpened as she smiled. He had seen this woman's face before, framed on the walls of the Kraft household. "I am Death," she said softly, "but you would know me better as Kristen." Tommy froze. Kristen chuckled lightly, and her raven flew away. A single feather dropped to the floor. "We have a lot to discuss."